All right, hello there, and welcome to Chapter 13. What we're going to do here today is go over some more scales. We've been talking a lot about major scales up to this point, and we've also talked about some pentatonic scales. Well, we're going to finish off by introducing all the rest of the pentatonic scales, and we're going to talk about how to apply them into some different situations. Okay, so we're getting more broad with our base of knowledge, and I hope that you've been practicing hard with the other stuff, but keep applying it to what you've been working on. Keep doing things in time frames like we've talked about in other lessons. Make sure you put a schedule together with your practice so you're doing time frames and you're really keeping track of what you're practicing and having a goal every time you sit down to practice. Okay, so the goal today is to work on the pentatonic scales and finish off the rest of them, and we're going to apply them to some great music called blues. So let's take a look at what we've got here on our board. Now you might see variations of patterns here based off the circled and squared off notes, and I want to explain that a little bit so we can save you confusion at home. Okay, the circled notes equal the root of the major pentatonic scales. Okay, now remember we talked about pentatonics before and how a major and a minor pentatonic exist within the same scale. So I'll use an example here of pattern right here. This is a G major pentatonic scale. Oop. Let me turn off my pedal here. This is a G major pentatonic scale based off the pattern 5 shape right here. Okay. However, it's also a E minor pentatonic scale based off the root right here, but it's the same exact notes, right? Because minor and major can exist within the same pattern. This is called the E minor pentatonic scale that exists within the G major pentatonic scale. So here's E minor. Okay, it sounds really great over the E minor chord, or even for that matter, E7, but we're going to use it today in a variety of different situations. So it's G major, and it's also, at the same time, it's also E minor. Okay, so what I've done now is I've taken that same concept and applied it to all the different major pentatonics, and I've squared off the notes that relate to the roots of the minor pentatonic scale. So check it out. Here's the next here's another pattern right here of G major pentatonic. We've learned this one before, I think. That's a G major pentatonic, and look at how closely that relates to some of the major scales that we've been playing. Here's pattern 1 G major scale. And the pentatonic scale we know is a 5-note scale, so that's simply this. But it still relates to that same shape, right? But it's also, where'd my pattern go? It's also an E minor pentatonic scale if we call this the tonic. Same exact notes, but it's the internal diatonic minor pentatonic scale inside of G major pentatonic. So all those kind of chords, that scale would sound great. Okay, and then so on and so forth. So check it out. Here's a pattern 2 G major pentatonic up here based off the pattern 2 shape. We've talked about major scales right here too. But now we're talking about a pentatonic scale. We know a pentatonic scale is a 5-note scale. So here we go. 5 notes of G major pentatonic sound like this. Okay, but that same G major pentatonic scale could be viewed as an E minor pentatonic scale, and without doing anything, it's right there. It's E minor pentatonic, right? right? But you haven't really had to learn anything differently. It's just a matter of what you call the root, okay? And there's a reason why sometimes you think of something as minor and sometimes you think of something as major. We're going to talk about that in other lessons. But I'm just trying to show you that if you've learned your major pentatonic scales, and I know we've talked about them, we've also actually learned all of our minor pentatonic scales. So I'm just reviewing this now so you really can see the picture all coming together. Our pattern 5 G major pentatonic would be right here. There's the roots circled for major pentatonic. Right? But we know it's also the relative minor is E minor, so it's perfectly at home over an E7 chord or an E minor chord. Works great. And then finally, the last one I think we haven't covered here is G major pentatonic. I know we've done this, but I'm just going to cover it here one more time in this lesson. Here's G major pentatonic right here, and we've also called that E minor pentatonic. If you call these notes the root, in fact, that could also be the root as well. I didn't mark it there, but okay. So we've got the whole neck together now in terms of what I've exposed you to and what I've shown you. You still have a lot of work to practice and get this stuff together, but I'm kind of putting it all together now for you. You've got all the shapes of pentatonic scales, you've got all the shapes of the major scales, and you've got all the shapes of the minor pentatonic scales. Okay, so you've got a lot of work, a lot of things to learn and practice, but you're really well on your way to getting these things down if you see the whole system and the way it fits together. That's what I'm trying to show you. It's a system that really makes sense if you view it in the right methodical way. Okay, so I hope you're trying to put that all together and you're starting to understand it. Okay, now let's talk about how we're going to utilize these scales if we could. You will recall that in previous lessons I've introduced the concept of harmony, and the concept of harmony where we took the major scale, right? Right? And we harmonized, in other words, we stacked every other note of the scale on top of every note, and we created chords. Remember that lesson? So we had chords like C major, the 2 chord became D minor. I'm using C major as my example. 3 chord became E minor, 4 chord F major, 5 chord G major, 6 chord A minor, 7 chord B diminished, and then we end up back at 1 again. And this is what's known as the diatonic harmony of a major scale, in this case C major. Okay? Now, how does that help us today with our pentatonics? Well, we're going to apply the pentatonic scale over what we commonly love to play and a basis for so much great music, the style of blues. Okay? We're going to talk about blues today, and we're going to apply and try to make the connection from a diatonic major progression like this and see how it relates to blues. Okay? So check it out. You'll notice that on the C major chord, underneath the number of the 1, the 4, and the 5, I wrote arrows down to these other chords here. Okay? Now you might be going, what does that mean? What does that mean? What's he doing there? Okay? Well, I'm trying to show you that a blues progression, excuse me, is based, strictly speaking, right off the diatonic harmony of a major scale. Okay, so when something is called a 1-4-5 progression, what someone's saying is they're playing a 1 chord to the 4th chord of a key to the 5 chord of a key, and that's called a 1-4-5. Okay, but how does that relate to blues? Well, let's see. Let's figure this out. A long time ago, when blues was first really being innovated, really in the late 1800s, mid 1800s, it was basically the combination of the black influence of slaves and the melodies and the themes that they brought over in their own music and blended with the European classical music of the time. So basically we had European music mixed with African sounds and influences that kind of merged together. They created more or less the beginning of popular music and Western and popular music, and especially blues. And so when the sounds of diatonic harmony from European music was mixed with more of the influences of the black slaves and the black cultures from Africa at the time, we started to hear sounds that became, it was really a basis of melodies that were being sung against these chords. You might have heard major progressions like that, but you started to hear notes like this against this. Right? That's really a definite minor third against a major chord. How does that work? Well, that was just the way it was being sung, and that was just the way that these people were feeling, right? They weren't feeling really real happy. It was a little bit more oppressive, and it wasn't exactly, you know, happy on the farm there. So there was a lot more, a little bit more of a melancholy sound, and that was the sound of minor scales or minor pentatonics, like these sounds, over major chords. So what happened is it started to become a style into itself. The 1-4-5 sounds of progressions were mixed with the minor pentatonic melodies of the black and the African slaves, and it became a style into itself called blues. And so it was really a beautiful embodiment of music that really became its own thing, that has really influenced profoundly all music that we call popular music today. So what that means now is you might have had a progression that sounded like this. That eventually became more like this. Notice I'm playing not only a major chord, but I'm playing a dominant 7th chord. Okay, and what did I do to make that a dominant 7th chord? Well, I took my C shape, right, and I simply found the 7th of the chord that was available to play that would normally be right here, and I made it a dominant 7th. And that created a great 1 chord in my blues. It created a C7 sound, okay? So that was beautiful for the basis for our blues progressions, is a dominant sound. And the dominant sound actually worked perfectly on every chord for the melodies that were being incorporated over the diatonic progressions. So it sounded great even on the 4 chord that would normally just be a major triad or a major 7th that were full 7th chords. You started to hear that chord used for the 4 chord as well. And then finally, the 5 chord normally would have been a diatonic 7th chord anyway, so it was basically the same chord, but together, all 3 of them really created the feel of a progression that was a hybrid, really, of European classical harmony and European harmony mixed with African melodies, and that really became the style, the great style that we now know as blues. Okay, so now that we've understood that, we can refer to a 1-4-5 and say it's a blues, or we can call something, let's play a blues that everybody's going to basically understand as a 1-4-5 progression. Okay, so how does that fit together in a form? What do we actually play when we play a blues? Well, I've taken the time to write that down, and I'm going to show you right here. In fact, I'll put it right here. Okay, so I've taken the 1-4-5 of the diatonic harmony, and I've made it into a blues harmony by making the chords 7th chords. Okay, so let's go over the chords now so we can really have a few voicings to play. So we already know that could be a C7 voicing we could play. Okay, and you can take all 5 shapes if you'd like and extrapolate or develop dominant chords from them, but I'm going to help you out here by showing you a few. Here's the major triad that we've had in pattern 2. If you want to make it a dominant chord, you you simply open up the fingering here and let your bar create the flat 7 behind where you used to bar here. So now you've got a C7 this way. Okay? So that's another way you can play a C7. You can also take the major bar chord that we add here, and all you have to do to make this a dominant 7th chord is pick up your 4th finger that was holding one of the 3 roots and open it up, and now you've got that flat 7 again in the chord. Okay? So we've got C7 here, we've got C7 here, we've got C7 here, right? Let's find one other C7 chord to play that might be useful. Well, basically, if you take this C7 and you use it up here for G7, you can connect those two together to play the G chord to the F chord here. So you can play, right? So we can use the pattern 4 shape for C7, pattern 2 shape for F7, and pattern 2 for G7. Okay? And you can also use the pattern that I showed you for C7 here. You can actually use that for F7 and G7. Okay? Now, what is the progression based off? It's based off of, let's see, I told you already, the 1, the 4, and the 5 chords of a diatonic C major scale harmony, but it's a hybrid of C major, right? From the influence of various cultures mixing together in America in the late 1800s. But let's talk about the form and how it works with the bars, okay? So if you notice how many bars we have in this progression, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 times 1, 2, 3. 3 times 4 is 12. So what a blues progression, a traditional blues progression, is a 12-bar form. There's variations of blues progressions, but the most common is definitely a 12-bar form. Okay? And the order of the chords has also some variation. But let's start off with one of the most common ones that we can start off playing is the 12-bar slow change blues. And that simply means that the 1 chord, right here, C7, stays for the first 4 bars until we bring in the next chord, the 4 chord. Okay? So there's 4 bars of C, right? And then eventually on bar 5, it goes to the 4 chord. Okay? And then on bar 6, it stays there, right? But it makes sense now to come back to bar 1, or to the 1 chord, back to C7. Okay? And this progression more than likely had a lot to do with the melodies and the phrasing of blues phrases that the slaves were singing against these chord progressions they were singing them against. Okay, it was a kind of a call and response type of music, so you'll hear a lot of that when we start talking about scales. Okay, and then finally, bar 5, 6, 7, 8, and then on bars 9 and 10 is the 5 chord moving down to the 4 chord, and then finally back to the 1 chord, and then finishing off with the 5 chord. The reason we put that there is because it really moves it back to the 1 chord again. Okay? So, real quick, simple lesson on the blues and the chord progression, but I wanted to explain that to show you how it came about. Okay? So blues is a hybrid of a diatonic major scale system, but integrated with dominant chords to have a certain stylistic character that really is unique to the blues. Okay? Okay, so now that I've explained how the blues came about, and what the chords the blues is based off of, and how it relates to the major scale harmony, we're going to practice it now with a couple of voicings that I've shown you over a rhythm section that's basically programmed to play the blues with me. So let's get your guitars out here, and let's take a listen here and check out what we're going to do. We're going to use this chord for C, this chord for the F chord, with an option of also using this chord, and this chord for G. Okay? So we're going to play over a very traditional feel in the blues, and that's called a shuffle, and that's basically where the 8th note is swung. Okay? So I'm going to show you how to play the rhythm like this. So here we go. You want to play along at home? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, let's do it again. All right, so there's your blues. How about that? It's your first blues progression. Hope you guys had fun with that one, because we're gonna revisit that a lot through our lessons, because blues is really the basis for so much music that we play today. I can't think of any other music that's been more important to popular music than the blues, and we can trace it back, really back to the beginnings that I was talking about. So it's really important for every guitar player to have a grasp on blues. Okay, so. For homework for you guys, I want you to do something. I want you to go back to the pentatonic scales that we talked about here in the beginning of the lesson. And I want you to practice just one, maybe two of those patterns over the blues progression and convert them. Just pretend, since we're playing over C blues, I want you to make these, think of these as C pentatonic, C minor pentatonic. Okay? So let's say we were going to use this pattern right here. Okay? Let's call C minor pentatonic the orientation of the whole progression, and basically use all these squared notes and put them on C, and you're going to be basically dialed into the key that you're going to want to play for this whole progression. So I'm going to finish off by jamming a little bit in C pentatonic, minor pentatonic, using this progression, this scale pattern right here, and also this scale pattern right here. I'm going to play this pattern and this pattern together to play over the progression, okay? And that's your homework for next lesson, okay? We practice those pentatonic patterns and practice the chord progression for blues. All right, here we go. Take me home. 2, 3, 4. Just pentatonic. All right, see you next week.